So, what do you get when you put one of Hollywood's most unpredictable actors in the same room with one of daytime TV's most daring hosts? Well, you're about to see a moment that didn't just get uncomfortable, it devolved into complete chaos. But before we go any further, try to imagine this. What would you do if an ordinary interview turned into a hostile situation on live TV? Keep watching, because this one speeds up quickly. Billy Bob Thornton walked out onto the set of The View. His signature quiet intensity filled the room as his dark shades seemed to mock the bright studio lights. The audience welcomed him with a lukewarm round of applause as he slowly made his way to his seat, adjusted his collar, and crossed his legs. It was business as usual. Whoopi welcomed Billy Bob on with a friendly hello and questions about his new movie, which he answered concisely, coolly, and to the point. All of a sudden, it appeared as if we were watching a normal celebrity interview on The View. But then, Joy Behar leaning in with a slight knowing smile. So, Billy Bob, you have been married 6 times. What is it about marriage that has you going back in? Everything on set fell silent. Billy Bob removed his sunglasses slowly and placed them on the table, but his expression had remained basically unchanged, although I'm pretty sure I saw something in his eyes that said, "You have crossed the line." "Well, Joy," he said with his southern accent even more defined, "I could ask why you felt it necessary to delve into someone's personal life in the first 30 seconds of a conversation. But I'm a gentleman and would never ask." An uneasy murmur ran through the crowd. Is the conversation about to get dirty? It only gets dirtier. Joy just tightens her smile and doesn't flinch. "It's not personal, it's public record," she argued. "I mean, after all, he is a public figure." "Public record," he repeated slowly. He nodded. "So anything pertaining to my personal life is up for grabs, then?" "Well, that is interesting." Feeling the tension rise, Sonny tried to diffuse it, mentioning how he has discussed relationships openly in the past. Billy Bob wouldn't allow it. "I have discussed my craft, my work, my songs, my films, and that is that. At some point along the line, the public decided that in exchange for becoming an actor, you also relinquish your privacy. That is nonsense." The atmosphere in the room now feels entirely changed. Ever watched a conversation turn ugly? This was it. Joy continued, pointing out that he chose to have the life that he does. "I choose to be an actor. I do not choose for my life to be picked apart by people who don't even know me and really do not have a right to be so invested anyway." The tension is now palpable. Whoopi tries to diffuse the situation, but Joy is not backing down. "I think you are being a little sensitive," she said, leaning back. That word alone seemed to be the trigger for what was coming. "Do you know what's sensitive?" Billy Bob's voice turned cold as he said it. "Being called sensitive for setting a boundary. That's not conversation. That's manipulation." The co-hosts looked uncomfortable. The mood had turned from awkward to volatile. Then came the eruption. Billy Bob leaned forward, his tone steady but absolutely firm. "I came here to discuss my film, my art. I am not here to play a game with you to get something out of me for a headline. I am not playing." Joy tried to brush it off, laughing lightly, calling it conversation. "No," he stated flatly. "You're having a conversation. I'm being interrogated." The studio audience seemed to stir restlessly in their seats. Is this going to blow up entirely? Joy dismissed him as being dramatic. Everything changed. "Dramatic?" Billy Bob repeated, then stood abruptly. A wave of gasps swept the studio. "I'll tell you what's dramatic," he declared. "Trying to be polite here, trying to have a decent conversation with somebody who won't stop pestering me to elicit a reaction. Well, now you have your reaction." The strain snapped. "Sit down," Joy commanded, her voice laced with a new hard edge. "You're being childish." "Childish?" Billy Bob's voice cracked for the first time. "Because I'm asking to be treated like a human being and to talk about my work rather than my personal life? Because of that, it's childish?" Whoopi jumped to her feet as if to restore some order. "Let's all just relax, Billy Bob, honey." But it was too late. The conversation had taken a step. and then another, and neither party was willing to retreat. A stare-off now across the table. The room was silenced. Then came the statement by Joy that escalated everything. "I think you know what your problem is," she snapped, pointing. "You can't handle a woman asking questions." The interview was over. It wasn't an interview anymore. And now the real question arises. Was it a matter of boundaries? Or something more intrinsic? Moments like these don't just bring about the conflicts, they bring about the people. And this one, it has certainly been spoken about after the cameras were switched off. Billy Bob's jaw clenched. The stress on his face was obvious. "Don't you dare try to make this about that," he said, his tone deadly. "Don't try to make it about gender, make it about respect. I've worked with some of the strongest women in this business, women whom I hold in the highest esteem. This isn't about you being a woman, it's about you being a bitch." Absolute silence filled the studio. The soft hum of the cameras adjusting, the faint crinkle of clothing as crew members tried to figure out what to do. "A bitch?" Joy shot back, standing to match his fervor. "I'm the bitch? I'm doing my job. You're the one that walked in with that nasty attitude." "I walked in here to promote my movie," he stated, his tone now eerily calm. "I walked in as a guest, and guests, Joy, are afforded certain basic levels of respect, something that you seem utterly incapable of showing." "Enough. That's it," Whoopi bellowed, stepping between them. "We're going to commercial." But it was already too late. Billy Bob grabbed his sunglasses from the table and headed toward the exit. A producer ran forward trying to stop him, but Billy Bob brushed right by him. "Go ahead and walk off," Joy shouted to his back. "Real adult behavior." Billy Bob stopped at the end of the set. He turned around slowly. "You want to talk about maturity?" he asked, his voice ringing out over the stunned studio. "Maturity is knowing when to ease off a push. Maturity is respect. Maturity is not parading your guests around like entertainment." He trailed off, then delivered the punchline that hit everyone like a ton of bricks. "But if you still don't know it by now, I suppose you're never going to." The studio audience audibly gasped. Then the camera zoomed in on the look of rage on Joy's face. She was practically glowing red with it. "Get him out of here," she said, glaring at the producers off camera. "Get him off my stage." "My stage?" Billy Bob snorted a short, harsh laugh. "This isn't your stage. It's a studio where you happen to work. And I am leaving because I've got far better things to do than to sit around and be berated by somebody who thinks television ownership gives them a pass to do and say what they want, whenever they want, to whomever they want." Alyssa spoke, trying one last time. "Billy Bob, wait. Let's just talk through." He was gone. His retreating footsteps echoed in the sudden silence, and only after he had fully exited did a palpable sense of tension fill the air. Joy was rigid, arms crossed, and utterly furious, her face a mask of contempt. Whoopi bowed her head and covered her face with her hands as the cameras remained on her for a few seconds before the producer finally hollered, "Cut!" When the show returned from break, Billy Bob's seat was vacant. Whoopi, with a strained smile, gave the audience an abbreviated apology for the episode's disruption, but Joy refused to budge. She stared into the camera and didn't apologize at all. "There will always be guests that are not ready for actual questions that can arise on the show. We cannot control that," she said, while the crowd continued to not know what to say. Some polite, tentative clapping, sporadic, and unsure. Others were still trying to process everything they had seen. One thing that became clear is that it was not an interview. It was going to be discussed for years to come. Backstage, the tiny 3-minute break was, by far, quite frantic. The producers spoke through their headsets in rushed tones. Whoopi seemed to be having a more urgent whisper with Whoopi. Sarah and Sunny were silent, looking very uncomfortable. Alyssa kept darting looks toward the exit that Billy Bob had departed through. And Joy? She was sitting with her arms crossed and looking from side to side. Shaking her head, she said, and was loud enough for anyone who was nearby to hear, "I'm not apologizing. I have done nothing wrong." "Nobody is asking you to," said Whoopi, though her tone implied the opposite. "We just need to get through this show." He's the one who stormed off. His voice climbed another octave. He's the one who couldn't handle a question. Why is everybody acting like I'm the one doing the wrong thing? Before they could say anything. There was a movement by the entrance to the backstage. All heads turned. Billy Bob had returned. He returned to the set, followed by an amused and equally bewildered producer. The audience held their breath to see what would happen next, and a wave of silence rippled through the set. They settled into waiting. Billy Bob didn't return to his seat, but instead stopped at the edge of the stage, his gaze fixed on Joy. "I came back because I don't want anybody to think that I ran away from this," he stated, his tone even. "I came back to finish this conversation." Joy gave him a raised brow stare. "Oh, now you want to have a conversation? After you stormed out? Dramatic," Billy Bob scoffed, surprise edging into his voice. "You've been provoking me since I sat down. You got what you wanted. Well done." He exhaled. "But to be clear, I'm not back here for you. I'm back here for the people watching, for all those who might believe what just occurred is right. Because it is not." Whoopi rose once again to attempt to restore order. "Billy Bob, why don't you sit down and let's talk this out calmly?" He refused to be moved. He hadn't taken his eyes off Joy since walking back on stage. "Do you want to know why I was upset?" he asked. "Why I walked off?" The whole room seemed to be in a state of suspended animation. "Because of people like you? That's why. You hide behind the spotlight behind this desk, behind the audience, behind this program, and spew hatred, insults, and judgments that you would never dare repeat if we were having a conversation one-on-one." "That isn't true," Joy shot back instantly, "and I'd throw that very question at you in private. I have nothing to hide behind." Billy Bob leaned in slightly, not taking his eyes off of her. "Really?" he questioned, and just like that, it had all returned. "Now the question is, where does this lead? Because right now, this isn't just an interview, it's a war." "So, to recap," Billy Bob began, his voice smooth, then it turned a little sharper. "If you were having dinner with me for the first time on a dinner party, you'd begin the conversation with asking about my 6 marriages. Is that the way you initiate a conversation?" The first time, Joy paused. Just a split second. It was enough. "I thought so," Billy Bob said very low. "That pause, I got it. It told me everything I needed to know. You know that was way out of line, a disrespect to me and a disrespect to anybody else who gets asked the kind of question you just asked, because that's what this show feeds on." He leaned back slightly in the chair, "Chewing people up and spitting them out for the enjoyment of everyone." "We don't chew people up and spit them out," Sonny came in. "We ask tough questions." Billy Bob looked at her. "Tough questions about what, Sonny?" he asked. "Tough questions about my work, my craft, the business?" He shook his head. "No, you're asking tough questions about my private life that don't relate to why I am on this show. That's not journalism." He paused. "That's gossip." The audience was in. The tension in the room was thick. Joy pushed back. "It's not gossip if you made it all public information and you've all talked about your 6 marriages before. You even wrote a book about it." "I wrote about my experiences," Billy Bob stated. "I wrote about what it took for me to get here as the kind of artist that I have been. I wrote about how I learned things about myself, my growth." His voice cut sharply. "I wasn't sharing those things to use as ammunition 20 years later." You could feel the room separate then. The audience members who began nodding in agreement and the ones shifting in their chairs and making it clear that they were on Joy's side. It wasn't just a situation on stage now, it had spread throughout the whole room. "Ammunition?" Joy scoffed, but it wasn't a hearty laugh. "Oh, please, you're just overreacting. I asked one question." One question that resulted in another. And another. Billy Bob said, and his words grew tighter when he added, "And when I tried to bring it back, I was too sensitive. When I tried to establish a boundary, I was too dramatic. When I got up to leave, you mocked me." He leaned forward. "So, where is it, Joy, that you take responsibility for the atmosphere you cultivate?" That one hit. Joy stood again, refusing to concede any ground. "I take responsibility for doing my job," Joy responded. I ask the questions that our audience wants to hear the answers to. What I'm not responsible for is your inability to manage a standard interview. Standard interview? Billy Bob almost scoffed at the sheer audacity of the statement. He shook his head slowly. That's what you say. Standard. Nothing about what you did was standard. Nothing about asking somebody invasive questions and then turning it around on them when they get angry is standard. Joy's voice rose immediately. Now I'm turning it around on them? Are you hearing yourself? I am, he assured her. And I hear every single word I'm saying. The energy was shifting again. Quieter, yes, but somehow more intense. Sharper. It's called gaslighting, he continued, making someone question whether or not that is how they were supposed to react. Telling them they are overreacting when they're not. Inverting the situation so the person trying to set a boundary is seen as being problematic. He looked her in the eye. Sound familiar? Whoopi reached for Joy's shoulder, an attempt at de-escalation, and was rebuffed. I'm not gaslighting anyone, Joy declared, a tremor in her voice. You're twisting this into a narrative where you are the victim. Poor Billy Bob having to answer questions about his personal life on national television. So dreadful. You're still doing it, he stated calmly. And somehow, that quiet statement had a bigger impact than any he'd made thus far. You're still trivializing it. You're still flipping it around. For one precious second, it seemed like de-escalation would happen. Sarah spoke up in a careful voice. Perhaps we can all agree that this got out of hand. And both parties could have reacted better. No. He cut her off, not harshly, but with authority. I appreciate what you're trying to do. However, this is not a both-side situation. I came here respectfully. I answered questions about my work, and then it became personal. That was not my choice. The air grew tense once more. Everything is personal with you, Joy retorted. That is the point. You cannot pull yourself outside of your own ego long enough to have a genuine conversation. He laughed then, a full, humorless laugh. My ego? He asked. That's interesting, considering you interrupt every guest. You talk over every guest and then get offended when they react to you. He took a step forward. You want to talk about ego? We should talk about the ego it takes to believe that you have a right to someone else's personal pain just because they are famous. Pain? Joy said, scoffing. Now your divorces are pain? Are you kidding me? And there it is, Billy Bob said, and he was looking right at Joy. That's it. The room went silent for a moment. That dismissiveness, that insensitivity, you have just made my case for me better than I could have. His voice remained soft. Every word was hard as a stone in its impact. You have no interest in me as a person, in what I have gone through. What you are interested in is the instant, the moment, the headline that's going to appear about me when I walk out this door. Alyssa moved to interject. I think what's important is that we both are willing to have meaningful discussions. Meaningful? Billy Bob cut her off and looked directly at her. This is meaningful? I'm looking around here at all of this, and I feel like this is the circus, and I'm the clown you brought here to do my act. Joy threw her hands up in exasperation. If you feel that way, that's up to you. You came here willingly. You knew that in order to promote your movie, you were willing to do this, so that's on you. No. Billy Bob cut through her words with a single syllable. Publicity is about my work. Publicity, Billy Bob stated firmly, is talking about the movie, what it is, what the story is about, who is in it, what the making of process was, what you are doing right now. This is not publicity. This is a total exploitation. The word hung in the air. You're using parts of my life story, my own life story, and trying to turn it into fodder for you ratings. And you're doing it as if this is all some fun kind of entertainment. Joy jumped right in. If you can't stand the heat, then get out of the kitchen. This is a part of showbiz. This is how it is done. Billy Bob shook his head, then leaned into his mic and stated, "No," he said in almost a whisper. "This is how you do it. This is how you've chosen to conduct your interviews. However, this is not the way all interviewers and talk show hosts operate. I'm aware that there are hosts who treat their guests with dignity, that there are talk show hosts who can ask very direct questions and at the same time treat the guest with respect." He looked Joy right in the eyes. "Just not you, are you?" Joy didn't have an answer for that. For a brief moment, she looked very embarrassed, and her cheeks flushed deep red with her mouth parted. Then she immediately snapped toward the people off camera. "Is it really acceptable for me to allow this guest to stand on my show and insult me like this? It is not your show. It is The View. You have 4 others. Are you going to forget that?" That was the straw that broke the camel's back. Joy turned around, her eyes like chips of ice and with an expression that could freeze time. "You need to go. Now?" Billy Bob's voice was strangely flat. "You've insulted me, you've insulted the show, and you've embarrassed yourself on national television." He was unmoved. "I am not leaving," Billy Bob said. "Not until I say what I came back to say." The air in the room had gone tense again. "And what I came back to say is this." His tone had altered, not in volume, but in clarity, becoming more intentional. To anyone watching at home right now, anyone who has ever been called difficult simply because they know their own limits, anyone who's been called too sensitive or too emotional because they chose to speak their mind. He hesitated briefly. "I need you to listen. You are not too sensitive. You are not being dramatic. You are not obligated to share the contents of your personal pain simply because someone else feels they have the right to it." There was a visible wave that went through the audience. "Unbelievable," Joy whispered, a theatrical eye roll in her direction. "A full-blown lecture now. Let him speak." Whoopi's words were a balm to the growing chaos, low and steady. The certainty in her voice made people still. Billy Bob pressed on. "Oh, so we're unethical. We're unethical for asking questions, for doing our jobs?" "Your audience wants a show," Billy Bob said matter-of-factly. "They want some kind of drama. They want to see someone get uncomfortable. And you're willing to do that for them." He looked her in the eye. "But at what cost?" The question hung in the air. At what cost to the people in the room? At what cost to your own ethics? "My ethics?" Joy's voice wavered slightly. "How dare you question my ethics? I've been in this business for more than 20 years. I've interviewed presidents, artists, activists. I've earned my place here." "I'm not questioning your history," Billy Bob said, a tiny hint of softness in his tone. "I'm questioning your tactics." For the first time. There was something else in his voice. Not rage. Something that felt closer to sincerity. "I don't think you're a bad person," he continued. "I think you've been doing this so long you've just forgotten what it's like on this side of the microphone." For a second, something flickered in Joy's face. A moment of indecision. Uncertainty. And then it was gone. "I don't need a lecture on compassion from you," she said stiffly. "I don't need you diagnosing me." Her tone was back to business. "I need one thing from you. Sit down and answer the damn questions or get out." She folded her arms. "Those are your choices." And with that, the confrontation went to the brink. What happens now? Does he walk away? Or does this escalate even more? Billy Bob held her gaze for a long moment, then slowly surveyed the table. Sarah looked sympathetic. Sonny seemed conflicted. Alyssa was refusing to meet anyone's eyes. And Whoopi looked tired. "Do you know what the sadist part about all this is?" he asked at length. The room leaned in again. "The sadist part is, I actually enjoy this show." Everyone was completely floored. I watch The View. I've seen you have incredible discussions, really impactful discussions. I've seen you challenge people in a way that made me think. He paused, his voice still steady and thoughtful. I've seen this show at its peak. Then his voice softened. But somewhere along the line, challenging a person turned into attacking one. A question meant to provoke thought turned into a personal invasion. And I've just noticed that nobody's admitting that there's a difference. We are aware that there's a difference, Alyssa chimed in quietly. We are conscious of that fine line. Billy Bob turned to her. Well, where was the line today? The question seemed to echo through the space. At what point were you going to take over and say, perhaps we move on? At what point were you going to try to treat me how I would want to be treated if I were sitting in my chair? There was no response. The room fell to an unbearable and heavy silence. Finally, Joy chimed in. Oh, you want to be shielded now? Is that what you want? To be babied? Maybe you should have stayed in the private sector. Maybe you should go back to Arkansas where you can't handle being in the public sphere. Billy Bob sighed, shaking his head slowly. Here we go again, he stated. The assumption that wanting to be treated with dignity is the same as wanting to be coddled. The belief that boundaries are inherently weak. He made direct eye contact with her. That's not how it is, Joy. His voice became harder now. Strong people set boundaries. Confident people set boundaries. Healthy people set boundaries. A pause. The only people who have problems with boundaries are the ones who benefit from crossing them. It hit. Hard. Joy jolted back in her chair, the noise grating in the silence. I'm done, she spat. I'm done being lectured by a man who stormed off, returned when he wanted to be acknowledged, and now he wants to play the wounded hero. She gestured to the producers. Get him out of here. The interview is finished. Billy Bob didn't flinch. The interview was finished the second you decided to make it personal, he said evenly. Everything after this point was simply a demonstration. Two guards materialized on the edges of the set, not quite sure whether they needed to approach or not. Billy Bob noticed them, offered a slight nod, and added, That's okay. I'm leaving. He took a step back. But I'm going out on my terms, not because I was asked to. He headed toward the exit, and paused one more time. And I have one thing to say that's going to make the whole room still. He faced directly at Joy. When you watch this back, and you will because the whole world will be discussing it, I want you to watch carefully. Watch your face and the way you deliver your sentences and the opportunities to diffuse the tension that you squandered. The tension was thicker than air. And I want you to consider why you did what you did. I want you to question your motives. His voice softer now, but somehow stronger. Question the real point you were trying to get across. Because I don't think that this was a very good interview. I think this was something else. Joy's mouth opened to speak, but Billy Bob raised a hand. I'm done. I've said everything that I've had to say, and I'll leave the last word to you, he concluded. He knew how important that was. And then he exited stage left. The second time. The last time. The security team trailed at a discreet distance as if for show more than for necessity. The audience remained in stunned silence, unable to move for fear of disrupting the moment, nor his applause. Joy stood for a second, hands tight around the table. Then she sat back down with a sigh, eyes still wide with shock. Whoopi reached a hand out to her arm, but Joy flinched back. Well, Joy said after a pause, her voice cracking slightly, some people just can't handle actual conversation. Nothing. No giggles, no haha. Nothing. Just silence. Even Joy realized it didn't land. Whoopi let out a quiet throat-clearing noise and turned, looking directly into the camera. We're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we will finish this program. The lights shifted as the cameras abruptly stopped. The studio lights softened, but the tension never left. Joy gazed at the empty chair where Billy Bob had been sitting. No one talked. There was no need to. They all knew what was happening or what had happened, both from the stage and at home. So here's the real question. Was Billy Bob wrong for refusing to bend his knee and say whatever they wanted? Was Joy just doing her job? And in the end, did anyone win or lose in this whole situation? And that is how one mundane interview turned in something unforgettable. That's the story of how Billy Bob Thornton quit The View after an interview gone wrong. Don't forget to subscribe and tell me in the comments whose side you're on.